butter with the sweet. And I hope when we get to the end of this, you'll understand why we call it the butter with the sweet. March 1, 1954, the United States tested the largest nuclear bomb they would ever test, and they tested it in the South Sea in the Marshall Islands. This was a bomb that was 1,000 times larger than the one they dropped on Hiroshima. And when they set it off, it sent a plume of fire and heat up 100,000 feet into the air. That's about 3 times as high as airplanes fly. When this heat rose, it created gale force winds like a typhoon, and it started to blow vegetation off surrounding islands. Pretty soon the Marshallese knew something was up, and so they rushed into court. They're going to sue those rascals, and they sued the United States government. Well, the United States said, sure, here, have some money, get off our back. Okay, we're sorry. They sent him some money, and pretty soon the Marshallese all had lots of money. But what do you do with money out in the middle of nowhere in a South Sea island? Well, you have to import stuff. Pretty soon they were importing all kinds of junk food, stuff that became a bigger bomb on their hands than the atom bomb. Junk food took its toll. Pretty soon there were plastic bags floating in the water all around the islands. Pretty soon the people had forgotten about their original diet, which consisted of tropical fruit, vegetables, and fish. Now they were eating Spam, frozen turkey tails, convenience foods high in fat, salt and sugar, and very low in nutrition. This was a major change, and they started to pay for it. By the way, diabetes was almost unheard of in the Marshall Islands prior to World War II. And then after World War II, people started to eat the American diet, and now 30% of the people over the age of 15 are diabetic, resulting in high rates of hypertension, cardiovascular disease, kidney and eye disease, and amputations. Around the world, in 10 years, we expect that diabetes will increase by 23% in America, 24% in Russia, 33% in Australia. But what about the third world countries? Some of these countries are looking at a 44% increase, like in South America, 50% increase in Africa. And they don't have the medical system in place to take care of this kind of disease. They're going to be in trouble. And then in Asia, 57%. This is particularly in India, where the people are starting to adopt more Western type eating patterns, especially including more animal products in their diet. Here is the United States from 1980 to 2005. In 1980, we had about 6 million diabetics. That's a lot. But notice by the time we reach 2005, that number has risen to nearly 21 million. And we know the population hasn't jumped by that much. Oh, but I thought diabetes was like inherited. You know, my grandmother had it, therefore I have it. Well, if diabetes is inherited, the diabetics sure are having a lot more children than anybody else. Well, we know that isn't true. And the Marshallese, who did they inherit it from? Well, I guess from the Americans. You really inherit it from your grocer. But why does it run in families then? Well, families tend to pass on their lifestyle habits to their kids. Families who ate poorly tend to have children that adopt their poor eating habits, and pretty soon the children live like their parents lived and die like their parents died. And so it is genetic in a sense. Well, it's not really in the genes, it's in the habits that get passed down. And the complications, heart disease and stroke kill about 80% of diabetics. 73% of diabetics have high blood pressure. And it's the #1 cause of blindness in the United States. It ends up causing macular degeneration and retinopathy. There's about 24,000 new cases every year of blindness caused by diabetes. What about kidney failure? Kidney failure is a disaster. And the nervous system. For example, carpal tunnel syndrome, 30 to 50% more likely in diabetics. Pain or numbness in the hands or feet. Sometimes this precedes the diagnosis of diabetes by as much as 2 years. And then there's slowed digestion of food. The nerves going to the intestines are affected too. What about amputations? 10 times the risk of amputation. In fact, in 2001, there was 81,000 amputations secondary to diabetes. How's that work? Well, a diabetic goes wandering through the house in the night. They don't turn on the lights or something. They kick something. They get a wound on their toe. They never know they have a wound on their toe because they don't have any feeling in their toe. And an infection starts in. Then they notice that there's an awful lot of brown liquid or staining on their socks if they're wearing white socks, or maybe a little blood. And then by then the infection is taken off and maybe down to the bone. And what about the brain of the diabetic? You know, diabetics have changes in their personality. It's interesting, I had a patient, he came to these meetings, I talked about diabetes, he went home, he started practicing it. His disposition improved so much that his sister, who was usually at odds with him, decided she better come and learn about this too, because this was great stuff. Mood and memory changes. More likely to get depressed, 10 to 35% more, and their brains begin to shrink. Other complications, more likely to get an infection, more apt to die of a pneumonia or the influenza, and life expectancy for diabetics is reduced by 12 to 14 years. What's more, those last years aren't the best. Diabetes triples the risk of ending up in the nursing home in middle age. What's the earliest record of diabetes? What's the history on this? You know, if we look back in the pyramids to the writings on the walls, we discovered that in 1552 there were descriptions of the signs and symptoms of diabetes. Well, do you know that there were some other people in Egypt during this time that were not Egyptians? The Israelites. It's interesting, when they got emancipated, when they had their exodus, that God told them, if thou wilt diligently hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians. Apparently, he had told them something that would save them from diabetes. You know, the Egyptians not only had diabetes, but they had heart disease, they had cancer, they had cataracts, they had a number of the diseases that people suffer from today. And if you remember on this Exodus, the children of Israel became interested in getting some of the food they used to eat in Egypt, including flesh pots. What is diabetes anyway? Well, diabetes is too much sugar. Too much sugar in the blood, too much sugar in the urine. Just a little too sweet, huh? Well, way too sweet, you might say. In fact, if we look at a fasting blood sugar test, we discover that a normal range should be between 70 and 99. We've put in a new category, and that is pre-diabetes. That would be 100 to 125 fasting blood test. And if it goes over 125, we say the individual has diabetes. So if diabetes is too much sugar in the blood or urine, what causes diabetes? This was a question that puzzled James Anderson. James Anderson is a diabetologist at the University of Kentucky. He decided, okay, we're going to figure out what causes diabetes. We're going to give people enough sugar to cause diabetes. So he started feeding a group of people sugar. I emailed him. I said, did you feed them a pound of sugar a day? He says, no, I fed them 2 pounds of sugar a day. I said, wow. And so he started feeding them 2 pounds of sugar a day. And then looking at the blood and looking at the urine to see how much sugar would show up there. 1 day went by, no changes. 2 days went by, no change. 1 week went by, no changes in their blood sugar or sugar in the urine. 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 10 weeks, 13 weeks, and no signs of diabetes. Whoa, well, okay, what's going on here? If sugar isn't causing diabetes, then what is? Well, they went on to do some more studies. They started looking at fat and diabetes. Here, if we have a diet that's low in fat, 17% of calories coming from fat, your risk of diabetes doesn't go up appreciably. It stays very low. But if you're getting a high-fat diet, say 46% of your calories coming from fat, your risk of diabetes goes up 40%. Well, that's quite an increase. Wow. Well, are there other fats that are dangerous? Yes, there's one fat that's very dangerous, and even in small quantities, and that is trans fat. Trans fat is the fat that comes about when you hydrogenate vegetable oil. How do they hydrogenate vegetable oil? Well, they take this nice corn oil that they've gotten from the corn and they heat it up to about 400 degrees. They put it across a catalyst, much like the catalytic converter in your car, and put hydrogen gas into it at high pressure. And it changes the nice liquid oil to this margarine-looking stuff, to grease basically, that we spread on our bread from time to time. Trans fat. 3% of calories increases the risk by 44%. Cholesterol, 270 milligrams, a little more cholesterol than is in one egg, increases the risk by 60%. You mean if I eat one egg a day, I could have diabetes much quicker? That's true. Cholesterol doesn't. And then if you're getting most of your fat from animal sources, that is saturated fat, the risk goes up 64%. You can see a little bit now why I call the talk the butter with the sweet. The butter tends to cause the disease. Too much sugar tends to exacerbate it and tends to be one of the symptoms. Well, let's look at trans fat a little bit more here. You see, if you look at an ingredient like this popcorn, popping corn, partially hydrogenated soybean oil, you can be sure that that product has trans fat. Any of the ingredients, such as partially hydrogenated oils, shortening, or margarine, but there's other ways of hiding trans fat. If you fry something, deep fat fry it, or fry it in a skillet, you can put the best oil in there to begin with, but when you heat it up, you start producing products of combustion, you start producing trans fat. There's a question whether oil was even made to cook things in. And in fact, oil tends to be a very dangerous product, causing a lot of disease because it turns to trans fat. Are there good oils? There sure are. There's some very good oils. Some of those come from nuts. Nuts are high in oils. In fact, studies show that if a diabetic or somebody's not diabetic takes and eats nuts, one serving 5 times a week, their risk of diabetes goes down by 30%. Well, how can that be? They're high in fat. Well, one of the reasons is that they are also high in vitamins and phytochemicals that help your body process fat, enzymes and the like. Oh, news item. How are we going to tell the people we've found the weapons of mass destruction? And here we have French fries and jumbo burgers. There's been more people die in a year from eating French fries and jumbo burgers than ever died in any war we've had. And it's true. You look at the studies. Notice here we have people who eat fast foods more than twice a week increase their risk of diabetes by more than twice, doubling the risk of diabetes. That's a big increase in the risk of diabetes just from eating fat. And who stops with a fast food meal twice a week? Most people are eating them twice a day. So you can see this is a big problem. Another source of diabetes, believe it or not, is liquid candy. We call it soda. What do they sweeten sodas with? Do they use sugar? No, they use high fructose corn syrup. A variation on sugar for sure, but it's a very dangerous variation on sugar. That high fructose corn syrup tends to increase your cholesterol, increases inflammation in your body, increases your triglycerides, causes you to gain weight much faster than regular sugar, and it increases the risk of diabetes by 83%. What about milk and meat? Here I have a chart on the wall, the 4 food groups. This chart was not produced by NIH or by the National Academy of Sciences, has nothing to do with recommended daily allowance. This was a campaign to sell more products. Studies show that eating a lot of milk and red meat increases insulin resistance, leading to diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease. And so these products tend to be part of the problem. What about stimulants? Well, what's a stimulant? Oh, coffee, for example. The caffeine in coffee increases blood sugar. Well, wait a minute, I didn't put any sugar in my coffee today. Well, it's not the sugar you put in the coffee that increases your blood sugar. It is the caffeine that finds sugar in your liver and pumps it into your system so you feel a surge of energy. That's why people drink it. They feel woken up. And so their blood sugars go up by 28%. Another stimulant is alcohol. And while it has some of the similar effects, its big claim to fame is that it burns out the pancreas. And the pancreas is the source of your insulin. Narcotics. Well, why are narcotics a problem? And we're talking, anything from morphine to Vicodin to heroin. These narcotics, the way they stimulate a person is they hit narcotic receptors in the body. But those narcotic receptors look very similar to an insulin receptor. And a lot of times the narcotics go over and get stuck in the insulin receptor. They block the insulin from binding to the receptor, and the person is more apt to have high blood sugars. Smoking, very high risk behavior, increases the risk of diabetes by 60%. So smoking has its toll as well. Well, that's the stimulants. We've got to talk about a new word. This is a word that's come out recently. Diabesity. Diabesity, a contraction between diabetes and obesity. The reason they came up with that word is because the two diseases are so similar and so connected and often are in the same person that they couldn't help but make a word out of it. And obesity is one of the most powerful risk factors for diabetes. How big is the risk? The bigger you get, the bigger the risk. Underweight people only have a 7% risk of getting diabetes in their entire lifetime. Normal weight people have about a 15% risk. Overweight people, 26%. Obese people, 44%. And very obese people have a 57% risk of getting diabetes in their lifetime. That's a big risk just from having a few extra pounds. In fact, 2 pounds weight gain increases the risk of diabetes by 4%. So if you gained 50 pounds, you can just see what would happen. Let's look at this on a map. Here's a map of the United States. Here we have 1991, obesity trends. Here you can see Mississippi is at the very top of the list for obesity. Here's a map that has the same thing for diabetes. Notice that we have 1991. Notice that Mississippi again is at the top of the list for diabetes. 10 years later, we find that here is Mississippi in the yellow. They are the heaviest state with more than 25% of their people obese. And here we have that Mississippi is at the top of the list for diabetes. Obesity increases diabetes. Anybody know what this machine is? A CT scan. This CT scan is used to take a picture through the middle of a person. The pictures would look about like this. You notice that there is white around the outside of a person. That's fat. We all have a layer of fat. Notice for the normal person on this side that there is a little fat around the kidney. This picture was taken from a normal person. Over here we have a picture taken from a type 2 diabetic. Notice there's more fat on the outside, but look how much more fat there is around the organs. Organ fat, visceral fat. This fat is dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Well, if we take your temperature, if you're healthy, should be somewhere around 98.6. That's your oral temperature, your mouth temperature. But if we check the temperature of your body deep inside, what we call your core temperature, it could likely be 99 or 100. It'll be higher. Well, what happens to fat if you take a chunk of fat, put it on the table, leave it there for a few days at 100 degrees? Goes rancid. That's right. It goes rancid. It goes bad. And that's what happens inside of people. That fat is more likely to go bad. Now, your doctor isn't going to tell you you're going rancid because you'll probably go find another doctor. But that's exactly what's happening. We measure the results of having too much fat in there, and what happens is your oxidative stress goes up, your inflammation goes up. You get free radicals floating around your body. Oxidized fat, fat that is rancid. And these oxidized fat particles, as they go through the body, they zap things. They end up getting caught in a kidney and zap a kidney cell. They get caught in the eyeball. They end up causing macular degeneration or retinopathy. These things go through your skin and cause skin problems. These are very dangerous for your heart as well. They increase cardiovascular disease.